Doctors could be on the brink of a breakthrough.
Migraines.
How to control them.
Tame a migraine.
A severe migraine.
Throbbing, recurring headaches.
Given all the noise, navigating the migraine experience can be confusing and scary, but you do not have to do it alone. Welcome to the Migraine Guy Podcast, the official podcast of themigraineguy.com and theheadachreview.com. Now, here's your host.
All right, everybody, how we doing this week? This is Kevin. I run the Migraine Guy YouTube channel and run this podcast. If you're new, hope you'll hit that subscribe button. What we like to do here is a variety of topics. We like to cover a variety of topics that relate to migraineurs. We like to start with me giving a little background about my own migraine experience this last week or so. Then we hit a variety of cool topics that have come out in roughly the last week as relate to migraine. So let us get started with my last migraine week. It's been really weird for me. I don't know what it is. The muscle relaxer is not as effective this second time around as it was the first 4 weeks that I was taking it before I noticed that it really wasn't working very well at all. So I took a couple week break from it in order to let it kind of get out of my system and then start back on it, hoping that the results were going to be almost identical, if not identical. And they are not identical. I'm not sleeping very well, even with taking it just before bed and taking my standard dosage of melatonin. And I'm getting some pretty, not debilitating yet, but they're creeping up into the 4 and 5 pain range much more frequently than they were the last 4 or 5 week cycle that I was on what's the stuff? Tizanidine. I was going to say Trokendi, the Tizanidine that I'm on right now. So I'm not sure if this is a sign of things to come or if it's just because the last week or so of school has just been very stressful and grading and doing a couple review sessions for my students and, back and forth. And now some families in town. So I've been running around a bunch, doing a whole lot of things, not sleeping enough, not relaxing enough, not taking care of myself enough. So maybe that is it also. I'm not totally sure. Going to be going to visit my sister-in-law next week, and so that should be a little bit slower paced, a little more of a relaxing atmosphere, so we'll really get to see whether or not the muscle relaxer and melatonin are going to keep my migraines at bay, or if I'm just going to need to start thinking about a new preventative or potentially upping the dosage on the Tizanidine. Instead of taking the 2 milligrams before bed, maybe going up to the 4 milligram pills. I'm a little worried about that. Just as I've said in the past, I don't respond super well to muscle relaxers. I tend to be lethargic and really, really groggy for long amounts of time. So I don't want to do it, but of course, if I need to try it, then I will try it. Let's see, anything else going on in my migraine life? Well, now that summer's out, I'm definitely using ice a lot more when my migraines start, not just because it helps with my migraine pain, but it also just kind of feels good. So the other day, we had the AC going, I had a fan going, I was like, man, it is hot and my head is starting to kill me. And, I chugged a bunch of water, made sure I'd had enough to eat recently, etc., taking care of all of the dietary nutritional stuff that I could, and threw the ice on and noticed that the pain started to go down as it typically does, but then also just kind of noticed that the rest of my body felt a lot cooler too, so it had that nice side effect also. So I'll probably be ramping up the ice usage for that. I know that there aren't a lot of studies linking temperature and migraine, but I certainly feel like when I get a migraine and I'm hot, I just tend to be more uncomfortable, and maybe that makes me more aware of the pain that I'm in, or it's just the compounding of being uncomfortable when I'm hot and then having the pain of a migraine. So I'm not totally sure what's going on there phenomenologically, but I do know that it does help, so I will continue to do that. Other than that, I really don't have any interesting updates. My insurance is going to be changing at the end of July, since I'll be switching, not working at the university that I've been working at. Currently, I'm going to be switching, and so I'm going to be needing to do new insurance and stuff, so I'm going to have to figure out how much the medications are going to cost and whether or not I can get a health plan that covers the current neurologist that I've been seeing and having good results with, or at least, better than standard results with. So that's on my horizon. I'll be, plugging away at the different insurance programs out there and seeing which ones work best for my circumstance. So if you have any tips, I would love to hear them, but I'm probably just going to do all the standard insurance outlets and see what I can get a hold of to cover the needs that I have in an affordable way. So that's kind of it right now, just kind of hovering. I was hoping this last week would be a lot more productive and relaxing than it was, but it just kind of bottlenecked in a variety of ways. So lots of things are happening at once. Which means that once they're done, everything's going to be done at once, which would be kind of nice. But I usually like to parse things out a little slower. Anyway, that is how we like to start the show. Like I said, if you're new, I hope you'll hit subscribe and leave a review on iTunes if that's where you're listening. We're getting close to 10 reviews, and I love every one of them. Positive or negative, your reviews help us not only be accountable to you and respond to the kind of things that you're wanting us to do out here on the podcast, but they also help other migraineurs, people like you, find the podcast. There are a lot of good podcasts out there for migraineurs right now, and they can all happily be second best in my opinion. I just want to be on top of the migraine world. So that being said, not really. That being said, let's get to some migraine news. All right, this week's bit of migraine news is going to be talking about a study that was talked about quite a bit in the health news world. In the particular article we're looking at is going to be from Reuters, and the article title is "Gene Tied to Migraines May Have Helped Humans Adapt to Cold." Now, there was a study that was done very recently that was examining European genetic history against African genetic history, and the reason for that was, for example, 88% of people with Finnish ancestry carry a migraine and cold variant genetically, compared to just 5 people who come from Nigeria. And so the idea here is that researchers have known for a long time that Europeans are much more susceptible to migraines than people with African history, direct African history, but they didn't know why. And so this current study looked at a particular gene, the TRPM8 gene, which is also involved in the regulating of one's ability to detect cold, but also seems to play a role for people who are vulnerable to migraines. And so this is a very interesting branch of research right now, also because drug makers are currently exploring whether it's possible to develop migraine meds that work by targeting this TRPM8 gene. This current study, of course, doesn't really affect that directly. It's not a direct study about how to manipulate the gene in order to affect migraine, lessening of migraines per month. But it is interesting that it's a study that is digging into at least a little bit of what the gene is, what its history might have been, and what some ramifications might be from trying to manipulate it. Some of the interesting things in the study will be the following. 88% of people, this was found, 88% of people with Finnish ancestry carry this TRPM8 gene variant, and that is contrasted with just 5% of people coming from Nigeria having that variant. And so this is just a partial explanation of why the variant is much more pronounced in European populations than it is in people with direct African ancestry. And the speculative, explanation, of course, is this adaptation to cold, which apparently was introduced into European genetics about 25,000 years ago, according to this study. And so, like I said, there's nothing specific about how this is going to help migraine sufferers, nothing specific about how it is going to influence research or how it's going to bring about better and new medications for us. But it is kind of interesting. When I was posting this online, lots of people were making jokes about how they're either extremely warm all the time or how they're extremely cold all the time, and so maybe they were lacking this gene variation. One cool quote from the study was the following, quote, stressors or deviations from normal patterns seem to be triggers for migraine attacks, and exposure to cold is a stressor that the body doesn't like. The migraine might be a warning sign that the stressor, in this case cold, could be dangerous and that the person should protect themselves from the temperature, end quote. And so this kind of goes along with the idea that particular things can be triggers for particular people, but that there isn't a cookie cutter trigger that every migraine sufferer is going to have. And so if you notice that particular temperature temperatures trigger your migraine, it might actually now have a basis in research. For a few years now, maybe the last even 10 years, there have been a lot of studies trying to argue that temperature, at least hot temperatures, do not act as triggers for migraine sufferers, but rather that sunlight, when it is much more prominent in the summer, is the real trigger, but we are only noticing maybe the temperature increase, not the amount of light increase, and so we are attributing the trigger for our migraine to the temperature when it's really the amount of sun that we're exposed to. However, this study might be pushing in the other direction, saying that there could be these genetic triggers, these genetic adaptations that we have inherited from our ancestors that might be, signaling that the stressor is dangerous. Now, I don't know about you, but I typically don't go stand in an industrial freezer for many hours, so I don't really see how the drop in temperature from 70 degrees to 40 degrees could be the kind of stressor that my body should justifiably think is dangerous. But in a variety of ways, our bodies are pretty stupid. They just respond to stimulus in a fairly simple way sometimes, and maybe this is one of those cases. So obviously, this is opening up the door to lots and lots of potential future lines of research, maybe even down the line some medication research, but of course that is very far off. Currently, the big genetic and migraine medication that's going to be coming out is the CGRP meds, which once they actually come out onto the market, we have actual numbers about how much they're costing, not just the speculations right now, and we have some actual studies looking at the effectiveness in the general population, not just the studies that have been conducted by the universities and the pharmaceutical companies to see how it works on the general population. We will talk a lot more about that, but I thought that this TRPM8 gene was both kind of a fun topic as well as interesting because of the ways in which it can lead to future research. All right, that being said, let's move on to the next topic. All right, this is going to mark the beginning of a new section to the podcast where I try to get a listener's either question, comment, or story implemented into the pod. I know a lot of other podcasts out there that I like try to do some sort of engagement with their audience, but our podcast being about migraines is slightly different, and obviously the ways in which migraine can affect our lives can sometimes be embarrassing, sometimes be humiliating, or very, very hurtful to talk about. So I haven't wanted to push too hard on asking you all to give me questions or your stories or tips that you have for the pod, but I put a little feeler out there on Facebook and Twitter and got some good results back, lots of positive feedback. So I definitely think it's something worth implementing at least for a while. And the nice thing about the internet is, right, especially Facebook, right, we can send each other voice messages. And so if you want to record a voice message either on Facebook or just in general and email it to me using your smartphone or whatever, you can do that. You can email me at themigraineguy@gmail.com, or you can just hit me up on Facebook or Twitter or Instagram or YouTube and link me to your audio post, and I can include it with your permission. Of course, you'll need to leave in the email or in the actual audio clip itself that you allow me, you consent to my use of it in the podcast, just to make sure I don't violate your rights or anything like that, your digital rights. But as long as you're willing to do that, I definitely want to implement lots and lots of listener, not just feedback, but just stuff from you in this podcast, because me talking all the time is certainly not what I want it to be. I want it to be community driven. I want it to be about us. We do have some interviews so far on the pod, but I definitely want to get a lot more just interaction with the listeners. So if you have anything that you want talked about, if you want to share your story, if you have a particular battle that you're facing, or you just want to share some stuff that's going on in your life, feel free to reach out and let me know, and I would definitely appreciate some audio files from you about that. And I think Facebook's probably the easiest, but I am definitely willing to use anything at the internet's disposal. Okay, so this week's question comes to us from Carol Warwick on my Facebook page, on the Migraine Guy page. So I think it's okay to use her name since she posted on the page, and so that's public. And her question is this pain doing my brain any damage? Is taking strong medications for my pain more or less damaging than having the pain itself? And this is a very, very good question. It's definitely a question that if you are on medications for migraine for any length of of time, eventually, even if the pain medication or the migraine medication is helping manage your migraine, taking pills every day just eventually leads to the question, are these okay long term? That really seems to be what is at the heart of Carol's question here. Now, I certainly don't know all of the research in this area, but as far as for the first question, is the pain doing my brain any damage? The question can be interesting. One of the ways in which migraines and long-term exposure to migraines in relation to your brain, one thing that can be affected is that you can actually get lesioning on your brain very, very similarly to how strokes affect the brain. And these actually can show up, the lesioning can show up on MRIs in the same way that MRIs would show stroke damage to your brain. Now, if you're exposed to migraines, or if you have migraines for 10 or 20 years, that doesn't mean that you're going to definitely have these kind of these kind of lesions on your brain. However, there is a growing body of research that is looking at the ways in which long-term migraine experiences can damage your brain. Now, of course, the damage can be in a variety of ways, right? There could be the kind of physical damage that we're talking about in terms of lesions on the brain, which will have negative side effects on how your brain functions. There's also the kind of long-term damage that comes along in more of a psychological, emotional way with your migraines that is probably better documented, given that the ways in which that kind of research can be run don't involve expensive machinery. They involve, psychiatrists and psychotherapists and a normal therapist reporting in an anonymized way what they have in relation to what their patients tell them. And so we know, right, for example, that the kind of pain that is being asked about in this question could be psychological or emotional, and we know that people with migraines are at a very, very higher likelihood of having anxiety disorders and depression disorders than the normal population. And so that's one way in which, if migraines make you more susceptible to depression, for example, and depression has any particular damaging effects on your brain's physical makeup or chemical makeup, then that could be part of the pain that that could be part of the ways in which your brain is being damaged. Likewise, there are these psychological factors that go into feeling either ostracized or alone, feeling like you're not understood, feeling like you are maybe worthless or not worth anybody's time because you're constantly in pain. All of these things are very, very real to migraine sufferers. Now, like I said, I don't know exactly what kind of pain Carol was asking about, so I wanted to highlight the possibility of lesioning and the ability of it to be tested with an MRI. That is definitely something you are going to want to talk to your doctor or neurologist about in order to see if, one, they are aware of the research, and if they are not, print out a little bit of a summary. I'll link to some of it in the show notes below. Print out a little bit of it so that they are aware of it, and then see what their thoughts are after they take your migraine history into account given the research, and just see what their thoughts are, because they are the ones who are going to have to order the MRI. They're the ones who are going to have their team do the coding, the med coding, so that the insurance company will pay for it. All of those things are practical considerations to take into account, but it's not the kind of thing that is not worth considering. You just need to work on talking to your doctor about your concerns with it. And then we have all of the other ways in which brain damage, quote unquote, can happen with chronic migraine or even episodic migraine. So great question, Carol. Say that 3 times fast. Great question, Carol. Very appreciative that you reached out and asked it. I will be looking for a lot more in the upcoming weeks. I might put out a tweet or a Facebook post maybe on Mondays or Tuesdays from now on in order to get your feedback. I'll talk about kind of the general stuff that the pod will be about that week, and then ask if there's anything that you want. But if you just have a general question or a comment or a story that you want to share with us, please reach out, because every time that someone reaches out and talks to me and allows me to use that in the podcast or the YouTube channel is a way in which our migraine community realizes that none of us are alone and that we can all interact and find support with one another. And so that's definitely the mission of the pod, the mission of the Migraine Guy. And so the more that can get integrated into these contents, the podcast contents, there we go, are ways in which I'm going to be implementing it. So that being said, let's get to your migraine tip of the week. What's up, everybody? It's Kevin here, the Migraine Guy. We will get back to the content in just a moment. I wanted to let you know that if you appreciate this content enough to donate as little as $1 a month to the Migraine Guy, you can do so over at the website patreon.com/the Migraine Guy. That's patreon.com/the Migraine Guy. Patreon has become a bastion for content creators online to get crowdsourced funding for their content creation. Patreon both encrypts your information very securely as well as takes a very, very small percentage before the content creators that you're contributing to get the funds. I know that every single dollar that is contributed helps month to month, and you can contribute as little as $1 per month, as little as $12 per year to show the Migraine Guy, to help me get the kind of weekly and monthly content out about migraine and headache related illnesses that I have been doing for the last few years. If that's the kind of thing that you value, I really hope you'll consider donating as little as $1 per month to help me cover the cost of website hosting, online content creation, and hardware upgrades and software upgrades necessary to keep the content relevant and professional. So if that's the kind of thing that you want to help contribute to, if you want to directly contribute to migraine awareness, both in the United States and worldwide, you can do so at patreon.com/the Migraine Guy. Let us now get back to the content. All right, this week's migraine tip of the week is more of an ongoing experiment that was started a couple weeks ago by a unbranded campaign funded by Novartis and Amgen. Novartis and Amgen are, of course, the makers of one of the makers of the upcoming CGRP medications, but they were trying to do and have done for a while migraine advocacy, and the way that they were doing it in this campaign was trying to get people with migraines to discuss their migraine experience without talking about migraines in the plural, but wanting to talk about living with migraine, being defined or not being defined by migraine, and making migraine stand out as more of an ever-present, constantly there issue that people who experience it have to deal with, instead of the kind of, oh, I get migraines too conception that most of the general population has when they think of migraines. They think of bad headaches and they think of them as things that they get infrequently, whereas people with migraine get them very often, get them at levels that other people do not understand who don't get them, and get them in a way that is not only debilitating, but can be very, very, humiliating was not the word I was going to say, but they can be very humiliating, as well as kind of depriving you of many of the normal things that people take for granted about living a disease-free life. And so talking about your migraine experience rather than my migraines is an attempt on their part to try to get in the heads of people who don't know what it's like to have migraines, to realize that having migraine is a constant battle, a daily battle, an hourly battle, sometimes a second-to-second battle, just to focus on your breathing, try to wait for the medication to kick in, realize that the amount of pain that you're in isn't going to last, even though it might last for a few hours or even a day or two. And so getting that kind of experience conveyed with the words that we use is the impetus for this campaign. Now, the campaign, I think, is over. Actually, it lasted like a month to try and get it this vocabulary change for migraine sufferers on the table, and I didn't realize it until it was over, so I didn't have a chance to talk about it or promote it while it was going on. But it's certainly something that we can continue to work on as a migraine community and see if it actually helps impact people around us in the way that they perceive our condition. I do think it's interesting, right, because when someone has cancer, for example, we don't say, oh, they have 5 tumors. We say they have cancer. They don't say, oh, I had my chemotherapy this week, period. In the back of our minds, when people tell us they have chemo, we know it's because they have this big, constant thing that they're dealing with, cancer. And so likewise, not that migraines and cancer are the same thing or the same battle at all, of course, But in the same way that cancer is ever present for the cancer patient, likewise migraine is ever present for the migraine sufferer. Not that we're always suffering migraines, suffering through a migraine or experiencing one, but it's constantly in the back of our head. We're always worried about potential triggers. We're always worried about the checklist in our head of, did I drink enough water? Did I eat enough food? Did I sleep a proper amount of time? Did I take the pills at the right time? Did I take all the pills at the right time? Am I getting too stressed? Is the sunlight bothering me? Did I forget my ice hat at home? All of the various things that go along, and those don't even involve family member events, work. That didn't involve children or anything. That was just kind of a very, very simple rundown of you living on your own or thinking about your own migraine. Doesn't go into any of the hundreds and hundreds of things that migraine sufferers worry about or think about on a daily basis in order to try and minimize the constant to try and minimize the migraines that they face on a constant basis. And so I do like the idea of changing from migraines to migraine. Now, of course, grammatically, it's going to kind of break down sometimes because we need to talk about individual migraine experiences with doctors and families and friends, not only the disease of migraine, the genetic disorder of migraine, but also individual migraine experiences. But on the whole, it is an interesting attempt to try to use our words to help reshape the ways in which people conceive and conceptualize of our very debilitating disease. And I certainly think it's something I will try to keep in my mind for a while and definitely try to implement in the way I talk about it, because we do need to use every single tool at our disposal to help raise awareness and increase advocacy for our disease. Not just because it's unfunded, which we know it is, not just because people must misunderstand it, because we know they do, but because if we don't cause a stink for it, if we don't fight for our advocacy, no one else is going to, unless they can make a buck off of it. And those are the kind of people we typically don't want to associate with and don't want to promote. So I will put a link to the article that I got the information from about the campaign that was run, and I will definitely try to stay more on top of the Novartis Amgen social media accounts in order to make sure that next time they do something like this, we could do a bit more of a unified presentation and awareness campaign to help change some of the ways in which we talk about our migraines. But it's definitely something that, even though the campaign's over, we can continue to pursue and implement in our daily migraine lives. So that being said, let's get on to the end of the show. All right, everyone, that is going to wrap it up for this week's podcast. I do want to update you. I had mentioned maybe 3 or 4 pods ago that that there was an interview coming for the podcast and the YouTube channel about legalizing marijuana for medicinal uses in states, because my state currently has it listed as illegal in conjunction with federal law, but there is a legislator here that is working on getting legislation at least on the ballot for November to have it voted on if we can use it in order to get it so that we can use it, for medicinal purposes. And we were going back and forth with dates. She had one day free, I didn't, and then she had a different day free, and then I did, and then she had to cancel, and then she had to cancel again, and then eventually her the guy who runs her scheduling basically said, we're in the legislative season and she's not going to have any free time for a number of months, but we'll let you know when she is available. And so that ended up also needing to be a face-to-face interview. Originally they were going to do either Skype or whatever, FaceTime, something like that, something that I could not be face-to-face with her in order to get it done, but then I guess that wasn't going to work either. I'm not exactly sure on the details because it was just kind of told to me in general terms, but I will be working hard whenever she is available in order to get her on the pod, ask her some good questions. She also gets migraines herself, and so I think that's part of the impetus that she noted in her email to me about wanting to get medical marijuana legalized in Nebraska. And it's a very interesting topic, one that I want to know the most about that I can, not just because it's marijuana, right, or anything like that, but mainly because I just want to know the process by which a state goes through in order to get something legalized that the federal government actually says is illegal. It's just a very interesting process, and I'm curious how it works, as well as all of the nuts and bolts about what medical marijuana could do for our state, not only helping patients, but also tax-wise and stuff like that. We're running quite a big deficit these last couple of years. A lot of the big schools have been slashed in their budget and other things, so I'm sure there's practical considerations there too. But it's all pretty interesting, but I forgot to update you all on that once I got the notification that she wasn't going to be able to do an interview for a while. So that being said, we will just press on doing our normal weekly migraine stuff. Like I said, I'm going to be out of town over the next week, so getting the next pod out might be a bit of a challenge, but given the way the scheduling has gone for the last couple months, if you are a constant listener, you know that there is no consistency to the podcast updating until we get this semester over with and I get back from this trip to California. So all that being said, if you're new to the Migraine Guy in general, we do a lot of stuff here, definitely not the least of which is we run a Facebook support group. We do that not because we try to promote our brand or anything, and in fact, we don't really allow promotion of any brands in the support group. The support group is just that. It is a support group, and in fact, we've had some various people over the last few weeks try to do some things that weren't as supportive. We had a little bit of drama, and it was settled quickly because support is support, and it is not anything else, and that is what our group is about. So if you find yourself feeling isolated or alone, feeling unloved or unsupported, you can reach out to me on the Facebook support group. Just search the Migraine Guy support group. We ask a few questions in order to filter out some of the nonsense people that try to get into migraine groups and flood them with spam, and once those people are filtered out, you can ask any question you have, you can comment on anybody else's post, you can rant about the best or worst about what's going on in your life right now, and we all will be there to support you and uplift you and help you feel like you are cared for, because you actually are cared for, even though your migraine may have you bedridden, may have you isolated from the world. There are people out there who care about you. You just haven't found them yet. So find us on Facebook, search the Migraine Guy support group, and like I say every week, we do that not because of any reason other than the fact that you need to know that you are not alone.